You feel it, don't you? The voices leaking through the cracks. That pressure against the inside of your skull. You didn't find Mad Tales. Mad Tales found you.
The Crazy Old Lady Who Lived in the Jungle. Bear had never been in the jungle before. He wasn't allowed. He wasn't allowed out of the compound. He wasn't allowed to climb. He wasn't allowed to train with the other boys. He wasn't allowed. But that was before the sickness, before his mother disappeared, before all of the people bled from the mouth and came for him. At least he found Lily. At least the old man found him. At least they escaped. The sights and sounds of the jungle overwhelmed him. The canopy, so thick and green and dark closed in, threatened to smother him, made him feel claustrophobic. It was completely different than the orange haze of the desert compound, the sun that burned even through layers of dust, magnified by the clear dome overhead that was supposed to protect them. In the jungle, the air was thick and humid. Steam rose off the plants, the green palms and leaves, the lavender flowers in the brush, the fern that carpeted the ground. He kept looking up and around, expecting a break in the green where he could see the sky, the familiar orange haze, but it never came. Then the headache hit, and he grew so dizzy and sat so hard on the ground that his teeth rattled. Lily, still clinging to the old man so that she looked backwards, called out, "He fell! Bear fell!" And the old man stopped and turned around. "What's the matter?" "I'm dizzy." The old man put Lily down and searched the brush with his eyes. "Don't look up." Bear continued to stare around him, his head pounding. "I said don't look up. Close your eyes." Bear did as he was told. Lily came over and put her hand on his shoulder. "You'll be okay." "Ah," he heard the old man say. "Here it is." He plucked a plant, an average-looking plant, maybe even a weed, from the pliant earth, which crumbled as the roots pulled out of the ground. He flicked the red berries off the stem, and they flew noiselessly into the brush. Then he pulled off 2 leaves and handed them to Bear. "Open your eyes." Bear did. "Chew on these." Bear frowned. "But they're leaves." "They're medicine, like the aspirin chews your mother gives you." Bear looked doubtful, so the old man shoved one into his mouth and started chewing. "Look, see? Swallow the juice. Makes your headache go away." Bear waited for the old man to spit the leaf out, but he never did. When he swallowed, Bear said, "Okay," and held out his hand. Within minutes, his headache was gone, and he felt a surge of energy infuse his entire body. "I feel great!" The old man laughed. Lily said, "Can I have some?" The old man considered for a moment, then ripped a leaf in half and gave it to her. "We'll all need the energy," he reasoned. He was right. The walk was arduous. Even worse, within 30 minutes they were covered in mosquito bites, huge red welts. A rat fly bit Bear's wilted hand, and for once he was grateful for the dead limb. The skin swelled and turned an ugly green, but he barely felt a thing. The old man found another plant with cactus-like leaves and broke a few in half. A thick white goo flowed out of it. "Here," he said, motioning at Bear's arm. Bear hesitated again. He knew that the old man was trying to help, but he rarely moved his dead arm, and if he did, it was only for his mother or father when they exercised it with him in the morning and the night. The children at school mocked him when he tried to do anything with it, which is why he kept it hugged tight against his chest. Nobody ever made fun of him for not trying. The old man nodded again. "It's okay. I just want to rub this on the bite." Bear returned the nod and let his arm unfurl from his chest. It was difficult, and the muscles screamed at the stretch, but he forced it forward just as his dad encouraged him to do and breathed in and out through his nose. He knew the pain would subside the more he used the limb. The relief, however, that he felt when the old man spread the white goo over it was instant and glorious. The little girl gasped when they emerged from the jungle onto the banks of the river. She heard the rush for a few hours before they actually reached it, a low white noise that crescendoed into a roar louder than anything she'd ever experienced. She knew the wind in the compound shot down from the cranium. Bear told her that. But the loudest noise it ever made was a musical whoo as it careered through the alleys, or the pittering of dust and sand as it blew against the dome or the skylights. This was disruptive, beautiful in its own way, but ominous and threatening. The old man motioned with his hands for them to stay put. Then he went over to the bank and thrust his hands into the mud. He rubbed it all over his face and exposed skin, then gathered up 2 thick handfuls and returned to the children. He pointed at Bear and slapped one big glop into his open hand. Rub it in. They camped a few hundred yards inland, far enough from the river to not have to yell to be heard, but close enough to gather water. There were fewer insects there, too, as the open space allowed for a sweet, wet breeze that kept many of the bugs away or swept them off into the jungle. The rest were stymied by the mud the old man spread all over their skin, and soon it dried and became a graveyard of papery wings and stick legs. When it flaked off, the old man had them apply more. Soon the already gloomy jungle grew dark as evening settled. The old man started a low fire that smoldered and smoked, keeping even more bugs away. They curled up on pallets made out of palm fronds, and Lily and Bear, exhausted from the terror of the day, fell fast asleep. Bear awoke with a start. The fire still burned in the middle of the clearing, sending a thin trail of smoke into the air. The old man must have already waked, but Bear couldn't see him in the dim gray of the morning. Something squatted at his feet, a few yards away. Its skin was dark and rubbery. It wore a thick, rough cloth around its waist, and around its neck hung a necklace of shells and tiny skulls. Its face was broad and flat, and it snuffled inquisitively in the boy's direction. Both hands gripped a bamboo spear with an iron tip. "Lily!" Bear turned to his left, willing his little arm out to feel for his sister on her pallet, but she wasn't there. An old woman, fat and round, stood at the edge of the clearing, holding his sister in her arms. She wore clothes the variety of which he'd never seen before, a flowing white and gray skirt and a light cream-colored blouse. On her head was clapped a simple beige scarf, and she looked as if she were getting ready to leave. With his sister. "Hey!" The woman turned and stared in terror at him. The thing at Bear's feet continued its calm, thoughtful vigil, regarding both of them with something more akin to bafflement than menace. "Put her down!" Bear demanded, and he struggled to his feet. The old woman's demeanor changed. A dark look overcame her features, and her brow furrowed. "Hi!" the old woman cried out, gesturing not at Bear, but the native. It tilted its head, but didn't move. "Off with you now!" She advanced, as menacingly as she could while holding a child. Bear noticed that Lily didn't just look like she was still sleeping. Her arms and legs hung loose, and her head seemed to rock when the woman moved. The native hopped back a foot, but didn't appear concerned. It kept its spear raised but at bay. "Go on!" the crone cried. She rushed it, and with a hiss it scrambled back another few feet. "That's right, you old codger! Don't bother these young'uns anymore! They'll not be your lunch!" The native grunted a reply, 2 short, gruff sounds from deep within its throat. To Bear it sounded like a retort. Then it spun and disappeared into the brush. The old woman laughed after it, saying, "Ha ha! That's right! That's right! Ghost grounds for runts on your side of the mountain!" "Put her down," Bear said. The old crone barely regarded him. "Or what? You'll beat me with that stick of an arm? Ha! I'd like to see you do as the boy says." The old man. He stood at the edge of the clearing, holding a makeshift spear of his own in one hand and a couple of fish in the other. The old woman's demeanor changed again. At the sight of a full-grown man, she became apologetic. "Oh, sir, please don't hurt me with that spear. I'll put her down directly, sir. I'll put her down." The old man strode toward her, throwing the fish to the ground. She clucked, taking 2 steps back. She produced what looked like 2 thorns and held them to Lily's neck. The old man stopped in his tracks. "That's right. That's right." Bear couldn't believe his eyes. Why didn't the old man do anything? They were just thorns. "Put her down!" he yelled, and rushed the crone himself. He meant to grab her by the legs, pummel her, do anything to get her to drop his sister, but the old woman was faster than he thought and quickly stepped aside. He felt something sting his arm. She'd scratched him with one of the thorns, but so what? He spun around and suddenly felt dizzy. "Ha ha ha ha!" the old woman laughed. Bear sat down hard on his rear. His vision went black in the corner of his eyes. He saw a blur as the old man moved toward the woman, but again she was too fast, or the old man was too worried about Lily. The last thing Bear saw before he blacked out was the old man going to his knees, holding his own shoulder where the woman had scratched him with a thorn. The blur of the canopy overhead, thud of feet and heavy breathing. He was being dragged through the jungle. Bear moaned. The motion stopped. Blackness. The old crone blurred into view, her face fish-eyed, a halo of light around her head. Were they in open ground, or was that just a break in the canopy?
You're not dead yet, are you?
Her voice echoed, but she didn't move her lips. Wetness came to his, and he drank.
Can't have you dead. Gotta keep you fresh.
Bear spit the liquid out. It wasn't water, it burned his tongue and throat. He felt the liquid on his lips again, but refused to open his mouth. Then the woman pinched his nose tight between her gnarled knuckles. Surprised, Bear gasped, and she poured it into his mouth, shut it, and clamped her dirty hand over his face. He swallowed unwillingly, and she let go, allowing him to cough and sputter.
That's right. You'll be feeling fine soon.
And it was true. Bear felt his limbs throb and relax, and suddenly he didn't care much anymore what was happening to him. He just wanted to go to sleep. To sleep. To sleep. To sleep. He awoke sweating. He'd been dumped on the ground somewhere. A hut of some kind, maybe? All he could see from where he lay was the thatched roof from which strings of roots depended. The muscles in his back cramped, and his legs and good arm too. He tried to move his feet, to flex the stiffness out, but found them restrained, bound together. His knees were also tied tight, and his right arm lashed to his side. The old woman must have thought his left arm harmless, for she left it free. He opened his left hand, closed it. It was difficult, but he could do it. Sometimes, when he neglected his morning and evening routine, as he had for the past few days, his arm and hand felt like stone, and he needed his father's help to pry it free of the grip. But fortunately, right then, that was not the case. The old man lay on his stomach next to him, hog-tied and unconscious. A thin sheen of sweat covered his stubbled features. A straw bed sat on the other side. Bear tried to sit up, but found himself too weak. He relaxed and concentrated on his left arm. He willed it to extend, to push away from his chest, to flex, to work, and shaking, it did just that. He let it curl back, eyes watering. It was too hard, he couldn't do it. He'd never be able to do it. The smell of roasted potatoes and garlic and basil and other herbs filled the air, and Bear's mouth watered. Was she cooking for them? It made no sense to knock them out, kidnap them, tie them up, and then feed them. His stomach growled against his will. He didn't want her to hear him at all, as if his silence guaranteed his safety, as if he could just curl up on the floor and will himself invisible and she would leave him alone. It was a tactic he employed often, usually at school or large groups, and it worked, sometimes to his own chagrin. But this time he couldn't. He couldn't just push into himself and hide. Lily needed him. The old man needed him. And the old crone wasn't cooking for them. She wasn't. She had other plans. Plans Bear couldn't articulate for fear of them coming true. For fear of what was happening to Lily right at that moment, happening while he lay there feeling sorry for himself. He felt energy flow into his limbs, and suddenly he was back in his room, his father squatting in front of him, urging him, encouraging him. Come on, Bear. Don't give up, just a little farther. Try to get your elbow straight. You can do it. In the hut, on the packed, rich dirt, Bear said, But it hurts. I know it hurts, but you're okay. Every day it will hurt a little less. So come on, push. Bear closed his eyes and relaxed his shoulder. His arm shook as it pulled away from his chest. There you go, buddy. There you go. It's hard. I know. Don't forget to breathe. Bear let out a puff of breath. Not like that. Let it out slowly. Let your throat growl. Bear did as he was told, and his elbow touched the ground. His forearm formed an L by his side. The shaking subsided somewhat. Open your hand. Bear flexed his fingers. All right, now push. All the way down. Okay. There you go. I'm doing it, Dad. I'm doing it. Don't yell. Just breathe. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Keep pushing. Bear breathed and pushed. His arm extended from the L shape and little by little lowered to the ground. The stretch was agonizing, but he kept at it. And when he was ready, he twisted his wrist. Even though it hurt, he twisted it, and it hovered there, centimeters ago, shaking, fingers splayed. He pushed, and finally, his palm kissed the cold earth. And that was it. He'd done it. His left arm was perfectly parallel to his side. rested, and relaxed. Once he extended it all the way, it wouldn't snap back unless he wanted it to. He could grip things, pick them up. He'd gripped a bat once. He'd untied and tied his shoes, too. And that's what he was counting on. The boy opened his eyes. His father was not there. He wasn't in his room at the compound. Garlic cloves hung from a line strung through the tight weaves of the thatched roof. And something else, too. Was that? He hadn't noticed it before, hanging near the wall, but he certainly saw it now. A light breeze blew through the hut, spinning the garlic and, yes! A wink of light flashed off its metal surface as it twisted on a leather strap. Bear's body filled with adrenaline, and a plan formed in his mind. All he had to do was get his right arm loose. The old crone's arm shook as she worked the knife back and forth, her movements quick and decisive. When the water came to a boil, she stopped the knife and set it on the ground next to the fire. Then she sprinkled more dried basil into the pot, the wart on her hairy lip quivering as she wafted the smell into her flattened nose. They'd done that to her, beaten her bloody, thrown her over the wall. She'd done nothing wrong, just practiced her arts, mixed her herbs and medicines. They were more than happy to overlook it when they needed her, so long as the cost stayed cheap, and she prowled in the slums. "Oh, give me a poultice for my rat fly bite, goody please, Mom. Oh, birth my babby. Oh, fix me a powder for my stomach." Yes, all was fine until her tastes grew too expensive. Just one more and that's the last, she told herself. But there was always time for another, and another, and another. The sweetmeat, so young and succulent. The last one belonged to a reverend, and they came for her at last. "You should have burned me!" she wailed, bloody and limping as she retreated to the jungle. Life in the bush was hard, food scarce. The rat flies bit, and the mosquitoes bit, and the red beetles bit. At night the ants plagued her skin, and yellow eyes glittered from the brush. The canopy weighed like a hot, humid cloak, and she sweat in her sleep. But she learned how to cull the garlic from the earth, and it leaked from her pores and kept the bugs at bay. And she learned how to snap the beetle's stingers to use just enough to paralyze, and the spine offered her fish, and the jungle offered her pig, and every now and then it gave her sweetmeats like this. The old man would be tough and hard. She'd cure and smoke him, but the young ones were like candy melting on her tongue. She'd have to discard the boy's arm. He'd been touched by the devil, and muscle like that was always tougher than gristle, not even good for stock. The rest of him, though, was fine and plump and strong, and her mouth watered just thinking about it, and so she turned to finish her work on the girl and stopped. The boy stood right in front of her. His left arm, the withered one, extended long and free to his side. He flexed his desiccated fingers, open and closed, open and closed. In the other, he held one of her knives, one of her long knives, the one she used to cut back the brush and to gather her herbs. "And what you gonna do with that there, boy? You gonna use that dry limb? You gonna stick me with your bony fingers?" The boy's face hardened and turned red. The old crone leaned dramatically back against her work table, a rudimentary platform she fashioned from bamboo and driftwood. Her knife was on the ground between them. She might reach it, but the blade in the boy's arm was long and sharp and heavy, and her back, wide and full, presented an easy target for him to hit. Instead, she feigned weakness and stumbled, letting her hand fall on the table where she knew there lay the pepper she cracked for seasoning, the pepper and the dried jalapenos, the curry and cayenne, a little mound she'd have to rebuild after this uppity pup was put down, labor she did not relish repeating. She would be quick with him, yes, but it would be painful. "You come for your bairn? You come for the wee one? Well, you're too late, Gimpy. I did her while you was out enjoying your sleepy snoring and snoozling next to that scrawny old man. Who dat? Your grandpa?" Her fingers slapped on the board, one snagging on the little girl's dress, brushing against her sweet, sweet toes. She'd make him watch as she popped each one into her mouth and crunched. "You don't look a you're from salvation." Bear said nothing, just followed her arm, a dead black intent in his eyes. His dried-out fingers flexed and fisted, flexed and fisted. "You want to kill me, do ya, boy?" There, she found it. Smaller than she remembered, but it would do. Oddly, in the distance, Bear heard something. A rumble that grew closer and closer. It sounded like thunder, but coordinated, a thrumming of hooves on the earth. He turned his head for just a second, listening. The crone saw her advantage, and though the thunder scared her and reminded her of the men and salvation and the wall, she took her chances and cried, "You'll have to move faster than that!" She threw the spices into his face, screaming, and launched herself forward. Bear held up his arm as the spices, red and black and maroon, shot into the air. It wasn't much, but just enough to get into the corner of his eyes, to raw his throat. He gagged. Tears blurred his vision, but the spices were too few, and he could see the crone's form fly at him, and with a cry of his own, he lunged forward, bringing the blade down in a powerful arc. It connected with something hard, and he followed all the way through so that the blade chunked into the earth. Her shoulder slammed into his belly, knocking him down. Wetness splattered across his face. Then she ran out, her hoarse cries desperate and shrill. "You've killed me! You've killed me!" Bear wiped the spices and liquid out of his eyes with the back of his good arm, wrenched the blade out of the ground, and chased the witch out into the jungle. For that's what she was, and Bear knew it now. A witch, come to life from one of the fairy tales his mother used to read to him before he went to sleep at night. The hut sat just inside a hog trail, and the witch sputtered out into it. Her arm was gone, and blood spurted out into the air as she lurched along. "You've killed me! You've killed me!" The thunder grew closer, and suddenly the path was full of men on horses. They wore white robes that gleamed in the dark forest, and on the back of each was stitched an ornate half-circle with a pair of hands reaching up and out as if toward the sky. The witch fell to her knees, sobbing, and the horses surrounded her, obscuring her from Bear's view. He stumbled toward her, his eyes streaming, cutting paths through what he now knew was blood. "Oh, mercy! Mercy, sirs!" Bear marched on, his jaw clenched. A tall man with long black hair that spilled over his white gowns reined up his horse between them. "Whoa, whoa, little brother!" Bear tried to circle around, but the horse blocked him. He reversed, tried again, but the man pulled his horse full circle and cut him off before he even made it 2 steps. Bear's head barely broke even with the man's boot, but from this level, and on this side, he saw the sword sheathed in a silver scabbard etched with runes. "Brother Oliver!" a gruff voice called. The man in the saddle turned his head toward the group surrounding the witch. A bald man with scars leapt down off his horse and drew his sword with a metallic ring. "Stop toying with that boy and come help me with this thing." Brother Oliver nodded. He turned back to Bear. "Are there more of you in there?" Bear nodded. "How many?" "2. Alive or dead?" Bear opened his mouth to say alive, but stopped himself. He didn't know. The first thing he did after unhooking the blade was cut the old man's bonds, hoping he would wake up and help him, but the old man's limbs collapsed to the ground and nothing else. He didn't take a deep breath or moan or even twitch, not even after Bear slapped him a few times. And then there was Lily. The boy's face crumbled. It's okay, Brother Oliver said. He lowered himself out of his saddle, kneeled, and took the boy by the shoulders. "Brother!" the gruff-voiced man called. "A moment, Brother Marcus." He turned his attention to Bear. "I don't want you to watch this," he said. Bear made no sign that he did or did not hear. Oliver tried to wipe some blood off the boy's face with the heel of his palm, but it had already dried somewhat. "Can I have your knife?" Bear shook his head. The old crone's voice dwindled to weak moans. All she said, over and over, were 2 words. "Pity me! Pity me! Pity me!" "Okay," Oliver said. "Stay here. Don't go back in that hut." Then he stood up and stalked over to the men, now circled around the dying crone, swords drawn. Bear counted. There were 7. 7 men in gleaming white robes with 7 gleaming swords. Brother Marcus barked something at Oliver, who gestured back to Bear, and the bald man glared at him. The dying crone's voice was barely audible now, and the men placed the tips of their swords on the ground and gripped the handles and lowered their heads. Brother Oliver said some words, but Bear couldn't make them out at that remove. He edged around the horse, and Brother Oliver finished his words. Then, as if some kind of unspoken command had been given, 7 swords raised above 7 heads. They hovered in the air for a moment, and a snatch of sun clipped through the trees, flashing on the metal tips. 7 swords came down heavy and hard, and 7 white robes were splattered with blood. Salvation. They didn't even bury the body. Not that Bear wanted this. He wanted to see it rent limb from limb. He wanted the knights to do what knights were supposed to do. Their mannerisms confused him, though. Polite, civilized. They used lofty words. They cleaned their robes. And yet, there was an innate viciousness that threaded each movement and every word, a carefully subdued cruelty that attracted and repelled the boy. In his own compound, the men were calm, reasoned, prone to reflection, careful consideration. His own father was kind and gentle. When he spoke, it was about his work in the lab. He reasoned with Bear instead of yelling, though he did on occasion raise his voice, or was otherwise sharp. These men, though not exactly unkind or particularly loud or angry, were rough-spun and made of harder stuff, as if in their silence there dwelled a brute beast frothing at the bit, pulling on chains. And the swords, why did they use them? The soldiers of his compound carried batons and stun guns. When he was small, Teacher brought them to the police dome, and the chief, an overweight pair of a man named Williams, showed them a vault with a cache of high-powered weapons, machine guns with laser sights, sniper rifles, a full wall of handguns, tear gas canisters, and grenades. "Why don't you use those now?" Bear asked. Some of the other children tittered. They always laughed when he asked questions, even when Teacher praised him for it. Chief Williams appeared perplexed by the question, and he simply said, "We don't need them. They're for the kind of emergency that doesn't happen here." How wrong, Bear reflected, that fat old man had been. He watched the knights work, setting up a perimeter, as Brother Marcus ordered. 2 disappeared into the brush, and 2 more stood guard on opposite ends of the clearing. Another, one Marcus referred to as Christian, ducked into the house with Oliver. Oliver emerged a few moments later and stalked toward the boy, his sword clanking in its sheath on his belt. Bear tilted his head to get a better look at it. Oliver noticed and withdrew it. "Would you like to hold it?" Bear nodded. "You'll have to drop yours." Bear looked at the blade in his right hand. He pulled his left arm up to his chest, unconscious of how he seemed to disappear into himself as he did so. His blade, so sharp and menacing before, looked rusty and common in comparison to the knight's swords. He nodded again and tossed it aside. "Very well," Oliver said, smiling. "By the handle, then." Bear did, and the sword thunked into the ground. It felt like he dislocated his shoulder. Oliver laughed, but not in a mean way. "Both hands," he said, glancing at the fist curled rigid against the boy's chest. "But you used it before, didn't you? It was not like that when I found you." Bear thought a moment. It was true, he had used it. From the moment he pulled the blade down from the hut's roof up until a few seconds ago, his arm had been straight and strong, and he'd flexed it. He'd cut that disgusting old crone in 2. He pushed, letting the muscles roll out, extend. It wasn't as difficult as before, and soon he held it firm against his thigh. "Okay, now grip." Bear did. He reached out with both arms, the weaker one wavering and shaking a little. This one on top, firm and snug. Good. Now the other one, underneath. Good. He still held on to the sword, giving Bear the ballast he'd need to secure his grip. Out of the corner of his eye, Bear saw Christian carry something out of the hut. His eyes wandered in that direction, but Oliver said, "Focus!" and Bear's attention snapped back to the sword. It was heavy in his grasp, and he felt its weightiness, its seriousness. It was different than a gun, different from a taser. This was death, extended from his arm, from his soul. "How does that feel?" Oliver asked. Bear considered for a moment. Finally he said, "Heavy." The knight took the sword by the handle and resheathed it. That's one of the best descriptions of it I've ever heard. They headed east, toward the cranium, against the flow of the spine. Brother Oliver rode with Bear in front of him. He urged the boy to hold the reins with both hands, showed him how to guide his horse through the roots and prickers of the jungle, and, once they'd emerged from under the canopy, how to avoid the swamp grass and sand traps that would swallow them whole. Bear enjoyed the ride, though his thighs and rear were sore after only a few minutes. They pushed forward at a fairly fast pace, never stopping, even after one of the men was stung by a rat fly and his eye swelled and turned an alarming shade of red. After an hour, Bear stopped thinking about time. When the sun dropped toward the top of the cranium, sending their shadows and the shadows of the horses long behind them, he dozed off in Brother Oliver's arms, and when he awoke, it was night, and they had built a fire, and he was lying on the ground. Brother Oliver was nowhere to be found. Next to him, warming their hands by the fire, sat 2 knights he didn't know. "A pack of 'em lurking in the bush a few miles back," one said. The other grunted and smacked his lips. "We'll carve 'em out in the morning, Brother Marcus says. Chance for a few souvenirs. I'd like to bring Bethany one of them necklaces they make out of bone. Maybe she'd sing me a song for it." "Aye, she'll sing you a song." They both burst out laughing. Pork. They were eating pork. Correction, they had eaten pork. Now they gnawed the bones, and it was intoxicating, and Bear suddenly realized that he hadn't had any food since before the crone captured him. A ravenous hole formed in the pit of his stomach, and it growled, announcing his wakefulness before he could with his voice. The 2 knights elbowed each other as he sat up. "Have a good rest, little brother." Bear rubbed his eyes with his right hand, first the left, then the right. His left arm, as usual, had curled up next to his chest as he slept. "Where's the old man?" They didn't respond. One handed Bear a hunk of meat. Bear took it, but just looked at it. He couldn't believe his eyes. Meat. He never thought he'd eat again. "Eat it or don't. But don't throw it away, I'll eat your portion." Then they stood and stalked over to the other side of the camp, making sure to toss their bones into the fire. Bear took a bite. The juices ran down his chin, and the meat, though a little tough, was delicious. He made short work of it, eating even the fat and the gristle, chewing away until only a bone remained, and that he sucked on until it was dry. Then he stood and tossed it into the fire, just as he'd seen the others do. "Rested and ready?" a voice asked. Bear turned. Brother Oliver, holding Album by the reins. He nodded. "Then climb aboard, little brother. We have miles to travel." The river rushed silver in the night. They rode along a well-worn path that followed the bank as it twined along the line of the jungle. Bear noticed that the knights' numbers had dwindled to 5. He thought he knew where the others went, and why. He asked Oliver, "Where's the old man? And Lily?" Oliver didn't reply at first. He scanned the river, the horizon, the jungle line. Bear knew better than to repeat himself. His father pondered similarly whenever Bear asked him a question. If he were patient, the answer would eventually come. If he pestered, his father snapped, and his curiosity disappeared in the harsh words, at least until Bear could demonstrate proper restraint. Finally, as if satisfied with his inspection of their surroundings as they drove forward, Brother Oliver said, "My brothers took them back to Salvation. They'll be okay there." "Salvation?" "Our city. We have 2, Salvation and Gabriel. You've never been taught?" Bear shook his head. "My father said we were the only compound here. He said that other than the Unan, there were no other humans." "The Unan aren't human. They're abominations." His voice contained an edgy sharpness that startled Bear. Not only had Oliver never spoke to him so, but the idea that the Unan weren't worthy of respect ran contradictory to everything Bear had ever been taught. The knight's face softened, and he glanced down at the top of Bear's head. "Your father didn't teach you about us?" Bear shook his head. Brother Oliver frowned. "Typical," he muttered. "Our mission," Bear began. "We know all about your mission. You read and record. You try to reason away his design. And where has that gotten your people? The old man, he wasn't your father, no?" Bear shook his head. "And the girl?" "That's Lily. She's my sister." "What happened to your people? Why were you out in the jungle with your sister and an old man?" The horror of the compound leapt to Bear's mind. He heard the moans, glass breaking, saw the blood gushing down chins, the shuffling soldier. "They're dead," he said, "all of them. They got sick and they—" Brother Oliver nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "They bleed from the nose and mouth, yes? They died but weren't dead." Bear turned his head up and around to look at the knight. "How did you know?" "It's in the book." Brother Oliver took a breath, seeming to reach into his memory. Then he said, "And blood rained upon them who did not hearken to his word. And he overthrew those cities of the desert, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew upon the ground. And he sent upon them a sickness, and they would walk the desert forever dead. And to those who would not hearken to his word, they would say, We will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it." They rode in silence for some time, the rush of the spine to their left, calming, soothing, the black wall of the jungle to their right, a looming, threatening mass. Out of the corner of his eye, Bear saw a flicker of light. At first he thought it was the moon, shimmering through the clouds. But then he saw more yellow pinpricks, like eyes in the jungle, dozens of them near and far. Sometimes more yellow eyes joined the main group, which seemed to shadow the knights. Sometimes they disappeared altogether. Brother Marcus barked an order, and the two knights whose names Bear didn't know peeled off from the group and stormed ahead. He watched their white robes grow dimmer and dimmer until the darkness swallowed them. "Where are they?" Bear began, but Oliver cut him off. "Are you familiar with the story of Captain Rome?" Bear frowned. Captain Rome? Of course he did. Every child was taught about Captain Rome in their Level 1 history books. He was part of the first people. He set up the compound, mapped the jungle, named the spine and the cranion. He told Oliver this, adding, "He disappeared when he tried to map the land beyond the cranion. The Federation never sent a replacement, and we've been here all alone ever since." A queer smile passed over Oliver's face. "The Federation is a myth, little brother." "No, it's not. I've seen the guns. Chief Williams—" "A myth." "But we're not from here. This planet, I mean. The Federation sent ships, my father said." Oliver nodded. "I'm not going to tell you your father is wrong, but tell me, little brother, have you ever seen one of these spaceships?" "No, but that's because—" "Have you ever seen anybody from a different planet? From the Federation?" Bear was confused. His father and mother and teacher and everybody else at the compound told him why they were there, that the Federation had sent them on a scientific mission, a mission to study the planet to ensure its fitness for human life. But the Federation started a war, or someone started a war with them. Bear wasn't sure about the details. But at any rate, they were stuck here, and they had no choice but to carry on. No other adult in his life had ever told him otherwise, so it was true. But so was what Brother Oliver told him. He'd never seen anybody from the Federation, never heard any voices come over the communications equipment in the government building. "That's what I thought," Oliver said, taking the boy's silence for an answer. "We were put here by God, little brother. God gave us salvation in Gabriel. He gave us the place where you came from. Captain Rome didn't disappear trying to map the cranion. He was killed, swallowed up by the Unan. That was thousands of years ago, ages and ages before you and I were alive. But ever since that day, God made it plain to us our mission. The Unan, they destroy our crops, they kidnap our women. We've been at war with them for years, little brother. They are a blight on this good place, a twisted mistake, a perversion of man who God made in his image. Have you ever seen one? Have you ever seen an Unan?" Bear nodded. He thought of the creature squatting at his feet right before the old crone kidnapped him. It hadn't seemed monstrous to him. Different, yes, but its skin was beautiful. He liked the feathers it used to decorate its body. It had a spear, yes, but he wasn't at all afraid of it. Then you've seen how ugly they are, how savage. God wants us to kill them. He wants us to wipe them out and populate the world with the children of men, his children. And we will. We will cut them from the face of this world with our steel. From the compound, Bear could only see the middle section of the cranion. The jungle blocked any view of the lower half, and the upper portion was perpetually shrouded in white clouds. To him, the mountain was a picture in a book, an unattainable image, a part of his existence, but nothing he'd ever considered corporal. Up close, however, the mountain was, for the first time in his life, real, an entity, a solid reminder of just how small he was. A landmass, something of a natural bridge, crossed the river. Bear saw it from a distance. At first he thought it was a part of the cranion, but as they grew closer he saw that they were at least another mile from the base of the mountain, which itself seemed not to incline, but to be a part of the flat landscape. Move his eyes up an inch, and the gray slate of the mountain dominated the sky. The moon was bright and the sky cloudless. The bridge was wide enough to allow them to ride two abreast. Bear looked down as they crossed. It was covered in green. What in the moonlight looked silvery. Plants, flowers, moss that hung down toward the river, which had calmed at this point. But the foundation itself was wood. Logs from the jungle that had been carefully placed and fastened together. It was sturdy and whole, and he didn't feel at all afraid as they crossed it. "Who built this?" he asked. Brother Oliver shook his head. "We don't know. It's always been here. It was provided." Bear wasn't sure. His father would have stopped to investigate the flora and fauna draping over the edge of the bridge. He would have taken samples, sketched pictures in his notebook. "Look, Bear," he would have said, pointing to a mass of green. "That's peat moss. Ambuchinania leucobriodes. See that in the water? That's fontanalis. And on the bank there, where the bridge ends, those ferns are called salvinia. Go ahead, pick them up." Bear was comforted by the memory of his father, but he also remembered feeling exasperated by it all. His father was relentless in his pursuit of knowledge, his need to define, divide, classify, describe. It was interesting, yes, but sometimes he wanted a plant to be a plant. Brother Oliver's point of view made this possible. These are plants. They are here. Yes. This is a bridge. It is here. Yes. That's all he had to think about, the fact that they existed. He could use it without pause, without having to think why or how, just use it and move on. Very appealing. A thick jungle encircled the Cranion at its base, spreading up the lower section for hundreds of feet before petering out into gray shale. Bear didn't know what was on the other side. Did it empty out into desert like it did on his side of the river? Or did the growth wash out endlessly to whatever lay beyond? He wondered where the spine ended. His father told him that it started as snow atop the Cranion, and that the snow melted into little creeks and streams that fed into the river at the mountain's base, and that it ended in the ocean far, far away, but he'd never seen it. Brother Oliver told him that Salvation and Gabriel were built upon the banks of the river, and that it was endless, and that God had provided it for them, and nobody knew where it began. When they crossed the bridge, the two knights emerged from the jungle line a few hundred yards ahead of them. As they drew near, Bear saw that their robes were covered in blood, red and thick, and that one held his arm cradled against his torso as if it would fall off if he let it go. "What news?" Marcus barked. "Unan," the uninjured one answered. "A few packs at first. We dispatched over a dozen, but then hundreds. They flooded in from the basin. We killed many, but—" He nodded at the injured man. Then a great howl rose up from the jungle line, and Bear saw dozens of pricks of yellow light up, then dozens of dozens, and more and more. The lights showed up from behind them, too, and in front of them. To the left roared the spine. The knights, startled, shot panic glances all around. They withdrew their swords. "Backs to the river!" Marcus cried. "We stand and hold!" They formed a line against the onslaught. For a moment, Bear thought Brother Oliver would keep him there in his saddle, use him like a shield, but then the man spoke. "Get down, little brother." "But—" "Get down. You can't help us here, not yet." He lifted the boy out of the saddle and lowered him to the ground. "You know how to hide, right? Hide so nobody can see you?" Bear nodded. He wasn't sure if he could do it, but he would try. A spear thunked in the ground 50 yards away. Brother Oliver pointed upriver, north, toward the Cranion. The maps teacher had him study ended with the mountain. They'd never explored beyond. "Run as far as you can that way. I'll pick you up when this is done." The Unan were swift and silent as they charged. All Bear heard was the percussive thump of thousands of feet and the clinking of the shells that hung around their necks. He wished they would yell or howl. That would be normal. But their silence was sinister, spoke of serenity and purpose. He wondered if the Unan who squatted at his feet was among them. A few arrows sailed overhead. "Run, little brother." Bear did. He ran until he couldn't hear the grunts of the men behind him, or the clang of steel. The children of Rome. Brother Oliver never came. Bear waited in the brush at least a mile downriver, first crouching, listening expectantly, then gradually growing sleepy enough to curl up into a ball and close his eyes for just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. He awoke the next morning to a bright blue sky threaded with stringy clouds. Insects buzzed in the brush. A cricket leapt onto his face and he waved it away. The idea to wander west, back to the battlefield, only crossed his mind once. He liked Brother Oliver, but the others frightened him, particularly Marcus. Brother Oliver said many times that they were good, that they fought evil, but he saw the way their eyes lit up when they killed the old crone, saw the way they lit up in the face of killing the Unan. And though Bear had wanted to kill the old crone too, he was afraid of it, afraid of what he'd be after. These men, he knew, relished the killing, had made it a part of their souls. He had no doubt that, had they come across his compound before the disease, they would have killed everyone in it, and found a way to justify it. With no place to go, with no adult to tell him what to do, Bear wandered. It was such a nice day that he found it difficult to be too sad. He missed Lily. He missed the old man. He missed his mother and his father and his teacher. He hoped they were okay wherever they were. It wasn't long before hunger gnawed his belly, and thirst dried his tongue, and the morning turned to afternoon. He turned to the spine and palmed water into his mouth. The Cranian stood before him, so close that he couldn't see the gray slate at the top of the mountain. It was oddly fascinating. His entire life he'd been able to see the entire mountain from the compound. First the blue streak of the spine at its base, then the green swale of grasses at its slope, then the tall pines that colored the middle, then the gray rocks, and finally the top of the mountain lost in clouds. Being this close made him realize how huge the mountain stood. He wanted to touch it before he died, even just the grasses, even if he spent the last of his life to get there. Maybe he'd follow the spine to its source. Maybe he could find a stick that he could turn into a spear, like the old man had. How hard would it be to spear a fish out of the rushing river? He struggled up the bank to search for something, anything. It was more difficult than he anticipated, and though the climb was only a dozen feet, he breathed heavily by the time he reached the top. Spots speckled the corners of his eyes. He tried to look around for something to use when the world spun out around him, and he felt himself suddenly weightless. He had just enough time to wonder if he'd fallen into a pit when his head struck the ground.
Wake.
The voice came from the watery depths of Bear's subconsciousness. It was his father's voice, and it was not his father's voice. He wanted to sleep more, and he wanted to heed the command, but his eyes were too heavy. Something sharp and bitter wafted beneath his nose, driving spikes into his sleep. His eyes flew open, and he sat up with a gasp. "Dad!" One of the Unan squatted on its haunches, not a foot from where he lay. It was decorated much like the one that had observed him as he slept in the jungle. Shell necklaces dangled from its neck. Strange dark markings tattooed its body. It pointed to a woven basket on the ground to Bear's right, next to his good arm, urged him to look. Bear did. The basket was filled with blueberries, thick and juicy. Bear tested one on his tongue, wondering if he could tell if it were poisoned or not. Brother Oliver's words weighed heavily on him. The Unan were monsters, an abomination. Yet this was the second time one had treated him gently, even given him food. Bear bit into the berry, and his eyes went so wide that the Unan laughed, a strange husky sound that chuffed up from the depths of his chest. "It's okay," it seemed to say. "They're safe. You're safe." Bear popped more berries into his mouth. They were delicious. He ate until the Unan reached out and pulled the basket away. It held its stomach and shook its head. Bear understood. He'd get sick if he ate any more. He remained where he was while the Unan put the basket on what looked like a bamboo shelf. A noise from the left, where the light seemed to come in. More faces peered in the entrance, smaller and younger looking than the two Unan he'd seen up close so far. Children? The older one, the one that fed him, said something to the faces in the entrance, and they giggled and scattered. Bear looked at the older one. The Unan shrugged and smiled sheepishly. "Kids, what can you do?" It squatted at his feet again, serious all of a sudden, but without losing its mirth. It pointed at Bear's withered arm, curled comfortably against his chest. "Can I see it?" Bear nodded. All the exercise of the past days had made him stronger, and now he let it extend, flexing his hand and fingers as he did. The Unan took it gently in one of its own, and Bear noticed how similar they were. 5 fingers, opposable thumb. The only difference was the color of the skin, which Bear now saw was paler on its palms, almost tan. Before he realized what was happening, the Unan swiped something on his fingers, something cold and creamy, and Bear cried out and withdrew his arm, waiting for something horrible to happen. But nothing did. In fact, the cream penetrated his dry skin and stiff bones, warmed his joints. It felt as if his knuckles and tendons had been oiled and greased and fully massaged. When he looked up, the Unan had already stood and walked away, deeper into what Bear now saw was a cave. It stopped and turned and beckoned for him. "Come." Bear stood and shuffled after, still wondering at his hand. It grew stronger by the moment. He wanted more for his arm, his shoulder. The cave was deep, but lit by torches jammed into cracks in the wall. For some reason, Bear did not feel afraid, even though the Unan outpaced him and lost him in the shadows, pausing only to beckon to him. The path narrowed at points so that Bear had to squeeze through sideways, and then suddenly it opened into a wide, deep hollow. In the middle of it sat a flat surface, a rock that had been carved into a table. Bear stopped in his tracks. On top of it lay a dead man. The Unan knelt before it, mumbling some words in its own tongue. The body had been mummified, but the decomposing rags rotted through in places, and the boy saw the shriveled brown skin, the bony fingers, the smiling teeth, and the tatters of the uniform worn by the soldiers of his compound, crimson with black piping, faded now, but unmistakable. The remains of the blue patch of the guard sat on its chest. A shell necklace hung around its neck. Who was this? As if to answer, the Unan stood and turned. It pointed at Bear's arm, then at the arm of the corpse. Rome. Rome. How did the Unan know about Captain Rome? Then it pointed at Bear's face. Brother, Rome. It pointed at its own chest. Child, Rome. Behind him, Bear heard the shuffling susurration of sneaking feet. He turned and saw the way blocked by dozens of Unan. All, the man behind him said, for suddenly Bear understood. Child, Rome. Human, Bear whispered. You're human. But the older man shook his head and pointed at Bear. Human, he said, then pointed at his own chest. Unan.
Think you're safe? Cute. If you're still breathing after this story, maybe you're ready for more. 13 tales. Murder, madness, monsters, and mayhem. Stories that will stick in your head like a bad dream and rot. Get the ebook, the audiobook, and the paperback, or collect all three if you've got the guts. 13 tales, no mercy, no escape. Visit www.silverhammer.studio and get your copy before something else